From the Ticats Audio Network, this is the Ticats This Week with RJ Broadhead and Luke Tasker.
Season's rolling right along. Ticats This Week, preseason game number 2. I'm the voice of the Ticats, RJ Broadhead. He is Luke Tasker, Hamilton Tiger Cats' great receiver and now great analyst. And that first game was a positive one, Luke. It was a victory for the Tiger Cats. We're getting set for tomorrow's final preseason game, and that is obviously Friday, in case you're listening on this on Friday. A bit of a different roster for the Ticats, but let's look at that first game. It was a good start. Starting defense, pretty much all the expected starters were there at the beginning, and they looked great. Toronto had a lot of trouble moving the ball. Special teams, couple of big plays, some good punts, good punt return. Bo looks ready to go. Taylor Powell, he got a lot of reps. He looked pretty good, considering he was just with the team 9 days after being cut by Carolina. So a lot of positives out of that first game. What were your thoughts on preseason game number 1?
Yeah, I start right there as well at the quarterback position, and we didn't see Matt Schultz. He is expected to have some time in Montreal, and so that'll be an exciting piece of that. But the two guys that we did see, I thought really did well. Not turnover free. Taylor Powell, he had some errors out there, some throws that he would have back, but apart from those, in my mind, they were sort of isolated instances of a bad decision or waiting on a guy too long and putting a ball into a bad spot. But apart from those isolated mistakes, I was impressed with some of the things he did. And then Bo Levi Mitchell, we saw him throw, I think it was 6 times. He had some drops from receivers, and apart from those, I was impressed with how he played as well, including the touchdown pass. I actually think it's one of the hardest things to gauge to me, RJ, was the defensive performance because of guys coming in and out. Like it really is hard. I'm sure that the coaching staff had some individuals that they were pleased with because there was some good open field tackles. There was some good plays all around, but it's hard for us to gauge the strength of the defense. I would say the offensive line for the Ticats had a good first preseason game as well. Offering Taylor Powell, who was in for most of the game, some time to make some decisions, and they did have success in the run game as well as the night went on. And so I think there was a lot to be excited about. I don't know about you. I think in the last 2 years, though, for us, that was maybe the most cohesive or energetic preseason game that I remember calling. It was a fun crowd at Tim Hortons Field to start the year off. Yeah,
packed crowd at Tim Hortons Field. In fact, during training camp this week, a couple of players commented on it, a couple of the new players, including Taylor Powell. He was surprised at the crowd and very impressed by it, and is excited to potentially play in front of the Tiger Cats fans this year. It's going to be quite a different roster in Montreal. You can listen to the game on the Ticats Audio Network. Luke and I will be in Montreal. It is a 7:30 start, 7:30 Eastern time. So a lot of the starters aren't going to be there for the Tiger Cats. We won't see Bo. We won't see a lot of the defensive starters. We won't see a lot of the top receivers. But something really stood out to me, surprised me a bit. The secondary for the Tiger Cats, it is going to be the expected secondary with Kenneth George Jr. at the boundary corner. Half beside him, JV and Elliott. Tunde Adeleke is back, expected to start. And then on the other side, Richard Leonard, of course, the all-star from last year, and the field corner, Lawrence Woods, who had a pretty good game in really only a few reps out there, but he had a knockdown, he had an interception. So you looking at the defense, there's only one expected starter in the front 7, but the whole secondary are the expected starters. What do you read into that?
Well, you've heard Tunde Adeleke earlier in the camp and his interviews address, to him, it's like the first time he's been with a different crew back there since he's been in Hamilton. Certainly feels that way to me. A lot of those guys in the past 2 seasons were guys I played with, and they were, a lot of all-stars, a lot of really great playmakers. And this year, that's going to look a little bit different. And so I think the answer is right there. One more preseason game, one more chance to line up at least in the first quarter and take a few reps together. That position group is all about communication. You've got a list of pre-snap communication to get through from the defensive play getting called And when the offense starts to take formation, they have to respond and form, in mirroring that offensive formation. And then once the ball snaps, there's a whole another set of communication that happens between those guys in the defensive secondary. They really have to be in tune to where each other are and what the responsibilities are between them. And so in the CFL, we get 2 preseason games. If it was more than that, you might see some younger guys or some guys still fighting for their job replace some of those. We have a list of players not dressed, and you might have seen some of those five DBs on that list, but 2 preseason games, and those chances to get live communication reps, live tackles, are just too valuable. But we're not going to see them all night, right? We'll see young guys get in there as well.
Yeah. So that stood out, as I mentioned before. One expected starter in the front 7. That's Chris Edwards at Sam linebacker, and that might be along the same lines where he wants to work with those defensive backs because he'll be dropping into coverage quite a bit. But we'll see Panay Pavihi, who's the 4th overall global pick. He'll be at middle linebacker. Carthel Flowers-Lloyd. On the defensive line, Trey Crawford, Mo Diallo, Niles Pinckney, and TJ Johnson. So what I read into that is there's a lot of starters who are cemented in that aren't making the trip to Montreal, and this is for quite a battle to get a backup spot, special teams. So there's a lot on the line for a lot of these guys in that front 7.
You're right, and you just said it there, man. A lot of these guys are going to make a spot here in Jeff Reinboldt's special teams lineups. We saw a mixed bag of things happen in the special teams game last week, including errors and mistakes, a big play return for a touchdown, and kind of across the board, we saw some things that needed to get hammered out and some successes. I think that's a great point about Chris Edwards too. That Sam position is, of course, sort of the next man into that defensive secondary, and there's a whole number of CFL formations that the Sam is going to end up being a deep zone player, and he'll be called into man coverage as well, obviously. And I think, interestingly, what I expected last week from the defense was some real simple stuff, some real, just some cover 3. Let's run some cut. Let's run cover 4 and maybe throw in some man. And you saw a more interesting play call than that. We saw a match early on in the game. You see man coverage more frequently. And there's a combination from a coaching perspective. I'm thinking you're going to test somebody physically, meaning give them something that they know what to do and see how they perform physically. And then you can put a strain on players mentally too and say, listen, I know we've been together for 10 days, at that first preseason game. I know we've been together for 10 days, but I want to see how you halfback can start deep and come up low and play a low zone. I want to see how you, Sam, can widen out to play a wide low zone of the field, and you can test guys by shaking up. So I think we saw an interesting defensive play call by Mark Washington, which is fun to watch.
Offensive line, you mentioned you liked what you saw out of preseason game number 1. So in Montreal, it's going to be a little bit different look. It's good news on the offensive line. If you missed it, Chris Van Zyl was I know you didn't miss it, Luke, but if any of the listeners missed it,
I knew what you meant.
Chris Van Zyl has been activated, so he won't play in this preseason game, but we're hopeful we'll see him in game number 1 against Winnipeg. Coulter Woodmansey will play. He's an expected starter. And Brandon Revenberg, he never misses a game, preseason, regular season. He's just he's so consistent. So he's going to be in there. And it was kind of interesting looking at who will be backing him up is Dayton Black, the first pick for the Tiger Cats in this past draft out of the University of Saskatchewan. So, there's probably going to be some teaching going on, but Revenberg just impresses me all the time. He never seems to. I know, was it last year he missed a game, but that might be the only one he's ever missed.
Yeah, it's only been 1 or 2 for his entire career, and maybe that's part of it. Also, there's a numbers game to play with too, and you got to have some experience in there. David Beard, not going to be part of that front 5, and you got to want to have somebody in there as an anchor. But I think, and I expect that Revenberg, like some of those other vets, we're not going to see him the whole time. I can promise you, for those young guys who are coming in behind that front 5, it's really it's comfort food for them to have Brandon Revenberg in the locker room even before the game, the warm up, to be talking through it on the sidelines, to have his gear on with them. And part of that is probably the move to keep him in the game. It's just to have the leadership still there.
Yeah, absolutely. It is, even as a fan, comforting to see number 57 in there. You just, we never talk about him because he's almost always mistake-free. So anyway, he'll be in the preseason game and probably helping Dayton Black a little bit. Black did not play in the opening preseason game, so we are hoping to see him in his first CFL action. Huge competition at receiver, Luke. I know it's a position that's near and dear to you. So Tim White not making the trip. Duke Williams not making the trip. It does create a big competition in this Montreal game that I know you and I will be focusing on. Omar Bayless, he was unbelievable in training camp, and going into that first preseason game, he might have been written in very light pencil, but he only caught 2 of the 4 targets at him. So he'll be looking to improve. Terry Godwin, we saw him last year. He is consistent. He caught all 3 receptions that were targeted at him in that preseason game, and I watched him
including that really interesting one, RJ, where he had to stretch low and outside of maybe what would have been an assumable radius. He made a reaching great catch and turned up field. I was impressed with that. Yeah,
it was all fingertips, that catch. That's strong hands. I made a point of watching him in training camp, and if he can get a hand on it, he catches it. He's really consistent. So looking forward to seeing him. Leandre Gallimore had the punt return touchdown. He caught all 3 targets. So he's not the biggest receiver, but he can be dynamic. John Vay Johnson and Calvin Jackson Jr. Jackson Jr. returned some kicks. Neither one of them were targeted, but we'll see them in Montreal, we assume. Khalil Lewis caught 1 of 2. So those guys all battling for spots, and 3 national receivers. Keandre Smith had some big plays. Richie Sindani will play against Montreal. He had that touchdown from Bo Levi Mitchell, and we'll see Chris Osikusi. So quite a battle at receiver, and really a battle at the national receiver spot too. The Tiger Cats have a ton of depth there.
Yeah, they do, and I think you may see some games this season where you have 2. You might see injury pending. You might see games where you go 3 Canadian wide receivers, and there's been teams, over the past years of the CFL that have had real success when you can have depth at Canadian wide receiver. That is a good recipe. It's the same story that goes for the offensive line and having Canadian depth there. And so I love watching these young national guys, put a show on. And you're right. We saw a couple good catches last in the first preseason game from some of the Canadian guys, and that would go a long way for this offense. I'm counting the receivers. 9 receivers going into this game, and not 9 receiver positions available on the Tiger Cats. So how does that competition work? Because you need to be targeted. Are they plays drawn up? Do you pay off Matt Schultz and Taylor Powell before the game to throw your way? How does it work? Because this is a desperate time for some of these guys to make the team. You know what? It comes down to controllable factors, and those guys, you're so ready. They're studying tonight. They're getting great sleep. They're ready to go and have a great performance. The truth is, there are so many things outside of their control. It's just the real nature of it. Coaches are going to call plays that aren't always called to give you a test. Sometimes you've got a job to do that's not even going to get talked about the next day, even if you do it bad sometimes, or even more frustrating when you do it good, and still it's like nobody really cared about that job, that play. The quarterbacks, they have their reads to make, and they've got to be perfect. It's not about finding a guy out there specifically. It's about them going through their progression correctly. And so the unfortunate truth of preseason in professional football, a lot of these guys are going to end up not having a job with the Ticats in a couple days and not feeling like they had a great test, not feeling like they failed and, okay, well, I didn't do it good enough, so I'm gone. There's at least some justification in that. A lot of guys are going to have a feeling like I never got a real crack at trying to make this team. And that's just the way that it goes in professional football, unfortunately.
Yeah, and these guys have all looked good, and they deserve an opportunity. But you're right. When you have a chance, you have to take advantage of that. At running back, we won't see James Butler in the preseason game, one of 3 1,000-yard rushers last season. So keep him healthy, keep him ready to go. I know the team is very high on Tayon Fleet-Davis. He looked pretty good. He was good catching passes, had the most yards after catch in that preseason game. Trey Regis was the leading rusher, 35 rushing yards. But what he did, and even Orlando Steinauer talked about it, that when they needed to run some time off the clock and get that running game going, he was instrumental in that. And we'll see Keon Edwards out of Western. He was one of the draft picks, big 230-pound running back. So he'll be get his first preseason action. What did you think of Fleet-Davis, Regis in that preseason game against Toronto?
Well, certainly Fleet-Davis stands out in my mind. I thought we saw a couple runs where he shifted well, he changed directions, and then that's one skill set, that shiftiness. You saw him at other times in the game being very patient, and that's sort of another running back skill set that you'd like to have, and the combination of it I think is fantastic and kind of unique almost that we saw it both happen. We got an early glimpse at both of those skills from Fleet-Davis, and so I'd be excited to see more of that. That last 4-minute offense drive from the Ticats, they ate up the clock from 4.5 minutes down to something like 1.5, I think, maybe a little bit more than that. And the drive ended, but it's a preseason game. It's guys who haven't even known each other for 2 weeks, and I thought that was really an impressive job, staying in bounds, just running the ball and getting first downs, but doing it kind of slowly. If you're not gonna do it slowly, you better score a touchdown. But they were getting 6 yards, and it was really impressive to watch. Unfortunately, the flip side of that is Toronto ran a great 2-minute offense to go down and score at the end of the game. But impressive job in that running offense, and over the past 2 seasons, there's been times with a productive run game, but I think this year the Ticats would like to have sort of eliminate what has been at times a really nagging deficiency in their cohesive team effort, and that has been the run game at times. So encouraging is all we can say without sort of knowing and seeing the starting team take the field.
A couple other battles at punter. Blake Hayes, Bailey Flint, they both looked pretty good. They trained together. They're both from Melbourne, so they've known each other since they were kids. So that's kind of an interesting head-to-head battle. And at kicker, Jonathan Garibay had a 46-yard field goal. Ethan Radke, a 19-yard field goal. They didn't have a lot of opportunities in that opening preseason game, but I've seen and been asked by a lot of Ticats fans about Seth Small, and my understanding is he is still expected to be a Hamilton Tiger Cat. I was convinced after the season he had, best field goal percentage in Ticats history, that 58-yarder that was the longest in the league last season. I thought he'd get some NFL attention, but he has not. Expected to be back with the Tiger Cats. Is it a concern if he's there for game 1 and misses the preseason? Would that concern you?
No, it's the one position that does not concern me. Those guys, you need a little cohesiveness with a holder and the long snapper. But that skill set transfers too from guy to guy, and you gotta get to know. Some kickers are more particular than others. And so you got to work a little bit with it, but they can plug and play. And if he's the best kicker at that time, whether he's been with the team or not, I would put him in. Matt Schiltz has held throughout his career, and I've watched him do it, and he's very, very good at it. And generally, a little tweak here or there can solve that. Not to mention they've been together doing it in past seasons, and so I don't think that that's going to be an issue. And I will say, in the first preseason game, I was not terribly impressed with the kickoffs from the Ticats, and you get the punting is. It's almost like the gameplay is less important for that position group than what the coaches know about them in practice and what they've seen happen. You're going to have 100 times more reps watched as a coach throughout training camp than you did in the preseason games, and it's such an isolated and isolated skill set that I tend to think we don't really know. They're going to know what's best from what they've seen. From their coaching positions, but yeah, I think that you've got to get those big legs in there, because some of those kickoffs, I think, that we saw in that first preseason game, that can come back and hurt you as the season progresses.
So last year, a couple of concerns with the Tiger Cats were turnovers. And,
no, I don't remember that.
And second halves, in particular, the fourth quarter, getting outscored. So preseason game number 1, they had 4 turnovers. The Argos had 3. Lost the turnover battle. First half, Tiger Cats led 17-0. Second half, they were outscored 22-10. Still hung on for that 5-point win, but you talked about that last drive by the Argos, and they were really coming on. So preseason game number 1, a lot of non-starters, guys battling for jobs. It's a wound that hasn't healed for Ticats fans with the second halves and the turnovers. Can we just write this off to preseason and not read too much into it?
Yeah, surprisingly, I'm going to say we can, actually. And I don't know if that was going to surprise you, because it killed it. We were dying all last year watching the turnovers. But, Taylor Powell forced a few things out there and played well. Elsewise, specifically, I'm thinking of that last interception he threw going towards the screen, the north end zone. And you could just see it. We could feel it from the booth that it was about to happen, because it was just taking way too long. And that ball flight, when you're throwing it 35 yards, it's too long. You've got too much ball time in the air, and everyone can adjust to it. So that he knows that. He if he would have ran that play over right again, he knew it right away. This is not somebody who just started playing quarterback, and so that's going to just disappear. That's going to go away as he trains and becomes confident. Bo Levi Mitchell, of course, has the experience to understand when not to force things. The other turnover that sticks out in my mind is the fumble from Powell in the backfield. Again, too forceful with trying to make something happen when nothing was there. And then also just a technical bad ball security, just the physical ability to protect the ball. So yes, I'm going to chalk it up to preseason. I'm going to say onward we go, and that Coach O is and his staff has changed their tune about turnovers as well, and that's been emphasized in camp, and so I'm willing to wait and see here.
So going into tomorrow's final preseason game, Friday night, 7:30, you can listen to it on Ticats Audio Network. Is it fair to say that this is an evaluation of a lot of players who are trying to make the team, seeing as a lot of the starters aren't even making the trip to Montreal?
Yeah, unfortunately for you and I, we may see even less of a cohesive team effort in the game. It might even feel more choppy and more preseason-y, because you just got to get looks at the guys you want to get looks at. And I hope that the young guys do. I hope that they get a fair crack, and I hope that the ball comes their way. And of course, that's not going to be perfect. It's the second and last of the chances that you get, and then all the teams have to make their choices. But we'll see some good plays. We'll see some young guys really, really, really working hard and trying to put on the best football game that they've ever had in their life, and that's exciting in its own.
Well, Luke, we'll see you tomorrow for the game and trip to Montreal and trip back. It'll be a lot of fun.
Yep, a lot to do in the next 24 hours, RJ. We're looking forward to it, man. It'll be fun to be back in Montreal and to call a good game.
Yes, so like and subscribe. Don't miss a show. Ticats this week, getting you set up for the final preseason game. The team will be set as of next week, and we'll lead into that game number 1 against Winnipeg. If you want to listen to the preseason game and hear some of the position battles, see how Matt Schultz does against his former club, you can listen on the Ticats Audio Network, listen.ticats.ca, or the Ticats All Access app. I'm RJ Broadhead, he's Luke Tasker. Thanks for tuning in to Ticats This Week.
It's been another busy week for your Hamilton Tiger Cats. Luke Tasker and RJ Broadhead have covered it all, and now we would like to hear from you. Email us anytime at gameday@ticats.ca. Subscribe to the Ticats Audio Network on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.